So I'm here with Eric Barr, my brother, who was in Cincinnati performing A Piece of My Mind, his one-man show that you wrote and you perform about your journey following your stroke. Well, it begins with the beginning of your stroke and goes through it and goes to recovery. And in the middle of all this, in the middle of as things were spiraling downward, and we've done a series of conversations now, and this is one piece of it, why did you decide to write the show?
That's an interesting question. I'm glad you asked that question. That's a very fine question. Let me tell you about my relationship with my wife. I think that's a pivot.
I thought that was a pivot too. So
why did I write the show? I had taught a class called A Course About Me, which was a course about autobiographical theater.
So you're a theater.
I was teaching. I was a theater professor, and I was teaching a class with a lit professor, and we would look at, and now I can't remember anyone's names. We would look at all these autobiographical one-person shows.
All right.
Yeah, and I thought it would be a great experience for students to write their own and produce, and perform their own shows, to explore their lives, and to see if it wouldn't help them when they went on stage as an actor to explore sort of their own inner world. So I'd had this experience, and then after I had the stroke, I think you had asked when the moment arrived. I think I was in the acute rehab center. This was after surgery, and I was laying in the bed, and I don't know who said, "Oh, he lost a piece of his mind."
Oh, really? Okay, so you heard
but
that.
The first thing was the name of the show. And I thought, A Piece of My Mind. That's the name of a show. That's the name of my show. I'm writing a show. I now have a name. Go. So I don't know if someone said it, or if I said it, or if I dreamt it.
Right, and this idea of writing autobiographical theater already had existed. You taught a class.
Yeah, but once the title was there, I thought, I got to do this. And once I decided to do it, then all my recovery became kind of an episode of something that I could watch.
So you began to watch your life as a...
Yeah, instead of just being there, laying there and being manipulated, I was watching what they were doing to me, and I was watching how I was responding, looking for a way to turn it into a show because I had a title, and I'd better come up with a show to go with the title.
Do you think it helped your recovery?
I think it did. And I don't have the quote in front of me, but it's a Ram Dass quote about becoming that's Richard Albert.
Right. Can you sort of give us what it...
Yeah, life really changes. Your perspective changes when you become a witness rather than an actor in a situation. And so when I became a witness to my recovery, I was able to step back from it, as we talked about the other day, and I really experienced it very differently. And I was able to watch what was going on and to see my own reactions, and not just to experience them, but to see them. And sometimes it took the edge off of things. Okay. When things were getting bad, I was able to see it as more of a dramatist rather than a character in the middle of the drama.
Right. And then Robin Russin, who's a friend of yours, colleagues of yours, who actually directed the show.
Right. Thank you for mentioning him.
So Robin was involved in the show, and I recall there's a documentary made about you called A Piece of My Mind.
Right.
That's I guess being used in educational settings, mostly, and maybe rehab settings.
Right.
But in the documentary, which I've seen, and I remember actually being there because we were sitting in Robin's office. You talked about that you started. By doing the show, you started acting yourself back to who you were.
Right.
Do you feel that when you're...
Well, I certainly feel that when I'm on stage, I feel better. I feel more human. I feel like I can move better. I can act better. I talk better because I've got to express myself more clearly. In everyday life, I get tired and I get complacent. On stage, you can't do that. You have responsibility to the audience. So I've got to come up with energy. So being here in Cincinnati has just been a wonderful and exhausting trip. I mean, 2 performances just knocked the stuffings out of me.
Really? Yeah, I've seen me laugh the 2 days afterwards. Frankly, that was one of my worries, was wondering if you could do 2 shows.
Right.
And you had said you wanted to, and I think what was nice is, I don't know if realized this, so you did an evening show and you did an afternoon show at 3, and there were clearly people who wanted to be there who could never have come in the evening.
Right.
People with disabilities, people who had problems driving at night, and doing the show twice really made, and that was something that you wanted to do.
I really wanted to do it. And doing it, that was yesterday, I guess.
Well, yeah, it was yesterday.
But this isn't yesterday because we're recording this. But the day before this recording, I did it. And when I woke up in the morning, I'd done the show the night before, and I was pretty tired. But I had a responsibility to an audience, so I had to shape up.
Right. Wow.
It's not a question of, oh, man, I'm really tired. Let me just crawl back under the cover. Mm-hmm. I got to get up. I got to pull myself together. I got to go do this show. I've got a responsibility.
Wow.
And so I kind of feel like now the purpose of my life, I say in the show, if there's a purpose to my survival, it's what I make of it. And the purpose to my survival now is to tell this story, which is not just my story, but it's every person who's ever had a stroke, who's ever been in the hospital, who's ever had to fight their way through the medical system. And so that's now the driving force of my life that keeps me going, I think.
And what's it like to perform before an audience? I mean, what's your interaction? Because with that, you also do a Q&A afterwards as well.
Well, I pay close attention to the audience. And yesterday, during the matinee, because it was lighter in the theater space, I could see everyone, so I really talk to people. And I remind myself before I go on stage to tell my story and to talk to the audience. And so I'm talking to them about my story. I'm not just sort of stepping back and
being somebody else.
Right.
But people who have either had stroke survivors,
right.
Or caregivers.
Well, as I said, it's their stories. When I'm doing it for people who are stroke survivors, I see them nodding. When I start talking about diapers, every one of them has their own diaper story.
Right.
So I'm telling my story, but suddenly I'm telling their story. And I think of it like how wonderful it would be to be a rock and roll star, you know? But you think of someone like James Taylor or someone like Leonard Cohen, whose songs have such special meanings to us. When we go to see them in concert, we're singing along, but they're singing part of our lives. They're not just singing their songs. And I think when I tell my story to stroke survivors and to caregivers, and even to doctors and to therapists, I'm telling their story. And so they're kind of singing along with me.
Right.
It's not just me talking, singing the song. It's all of us singing together and remembering together and being part of the same family.
What's it like to perform it? I'm trying to move away from being the actor for a moment, but the emotional context of telling these stories that you live, but you don't remember some of them. I mean, we meaning your wife Karen and our other brother Benson and I, we wrote a lot of these things down, and we told you what's it like to, as you're saying them, to evoke what you went through.
Well, as you and I have talked about before, sometimes when you think about your childhood, you say, geez, I remember that. And then you go, do I really remember that event, or do I just remember some black and white photo of it? Or do I remember the story I've heard about that incident?
But I'm asking about the emotional feeling of it.
So I don't find myself getting very emotional when I do the show. I don't relive the event. I try to, but I don't. I don't experience the terror or the fears that I experienced the first time.
Do you think working through it?
I think having done it a number of times, I've built up a kind of callous to it. I'm able to approach it a little bit more as someone's story, to share the story, as opposed to experiencing it.
So you get questions after the show. What kind of questions do people typically want to know? What kind of questions do they ask?
Did a belief in God help me get through it? How did you pay for all this stuff? God and money.
Really? Those seem to be the two.
Those seem to be sort of pretty consistent questions.
And in one of them you talk about a bit in the show. I mean, theology you talk about.
Right.
I mean, you say, I think it's near the third act.
Right.
There was no divine hand that kept you alive.
Right.
and that becomes important to you, because
Right.
that's what about the purpose is what you make of it.
Right. So I guess you're saying I need to add something about money.
I suppose you could add a thing about money, but that would be a longer piece of the show.
Right. But it's an issue that people ask about. And as I've added to the show, I'm very fortunate. I had great insurance. And so that made things possible.
Yeah, and that's not mine. It's
huge.
Not, I mean, people need to understand it. Health insurance it was transformative. If you didn't have health insurance, you know people who have almost similar experiences
Right.
that don't have health insurance, and people are trying to do fundraisers to help
Right.
them. But the amount of money to be raised is in the
Oh, no, you couldn't. We can't begin to raise the kind of money that you need.
Yeah, I mean, I can't fathom how much was spent. I mean, you were a month in ICU, and then critical care units. I mean, the amounts of money that's being spent and the number of people involved was extraordinary. It's hundreds of thousands of dollars.
I think you're on the low end.
Yeah, I think I am too. I think we're on the real low end of this.
Yeah.
And that's. I mean, this is profound that you had that and you were fortunate.
We were fortunate, very fortunate, and it makes a huge difference. How we would have gotten through it without insurance, we'd be living under this table. You'd be coming down to do your recordings, and we'd be under here asking for food. That challah would disappear off the front of your table.
I wouldn't know where it went.
That's right.
The borrowers, isn't it? It's a movie. No, I do remember you once saying that after you went to a bank, maybe to do some refinancing or something, and the banker made a comment that the number of people who've gone through kinds of things like this that come in and out bankrupt, it was much more common, which is sad. I mean, it is a sad commentary.
Oh, it's terrible. It's terrible. And I know in the last recording you did with Karen, she mentioned that we had long-term care insurance,
Right.
and that makes it possible for me to have a caregiver. And I just wanted to say this, and I didn't want to interrupt while you two were recording. But when the caregiver comes for the interview, one of the things they'll ask is, what's my primary task? And Karen will say to the person, it's taking care of Karen. It's taking care of Eric and helping him, do these things, taking him to appointments, taking him to the doctor, taking him to the gym. And I always say it's helping Karen by taking care of me and getting me out of the house so that she can have some sort of life.
Right.
So that bit of insurance has become really essential, and most people don't have long-term care insurance. It's outrageously expensive. We happened to buy it very early. When Dad was sick.
So our father, he had Alzheimer's.
Yeah. So I think it was early on that we decided, and the university had a special offer, a special deal. And so we got insurance then.
That's important.
And it's just, I don't, and we know some people who are struggling in similar situations with one member of the family, the husband having cancer or having dementia, not being able to care for themselves. And then they need someone. One guy's a big guy, and his wife is a little tiny woman. She can't help him get out of the chair, can't help him move to the bathroom, can't help him get out of bed.
Yeah, this is, and unfortunately, I mean, it's as a rabbi, having been with families and other families, this is how it plays out, and the economics of it.
Right.
Who's going to take care of, and what happens when somebody can't take care of somebody? Because the reality is, I think you said in your show that you had 3 people, 3 shifts. It was
right.
You had 9 people taking care
right.
of you. When Dad was in Alzheimer's, Mom took care of our mother took care of him for a while, but she couldn't. There was a point where she physically couldn't,
right.
and even you need special equipment at some point. So these become
right.
challenges. So you're 4 years post-stroke, right?
Right.
Do you have new insights, thoughts as you've progressed along the road? Have you come to discover things or ideas that you think that you didn't have early on, or things?
Yeah, I think I'm more grateful about things. And being able to see other people who've had strokes, I begin to appreciate how much I've improved in my walking and my ability to move my hand, to speak. We had a friend who had a stroke recently, and he couldn't speak, and he was on a ventilator for 2 months, and then they started using what's called a speech valve, which allows air to escape through the valve to talk. And I can't imagine, and I'm really grateful how far I've come, because I don't really remember being a puddle. I mean, when I visited him and I sat by his bed, it kind of hit me. geez, I remember being unable to move and being a little bit like that. But most of that's gone now. And so it's important to remember that, life has value, and that being able to do simple things is important and valuable. Being able to sit and have a cup of coffee, be able to sit up and not fall over is important. And, we forget that stuff all the time. When we're alive and healthy, we take it all for granted. Dr. Nas once said...
So Dr. Nas is your...
neurotherapist and friend. And she had said, we were doing a workshop together, and she said to the audience, do you thank someone when they open the door for you? And everyone said, yes, I do. And she said, have you thanked yourself for walking through that door? You thanked your body for all that it does for you? I mean, our bodies are remarkable when they work. And we don't notice until they're not functioning that there's something wrong. I mean, that's not right. We don't notice until they don't work how valuable being able to do things is. I mean, it's so easy to take for granted.
Right. I mean, you learned, you talk in your show that you learned to walk twice.
Right. And even now, I don't feel as grateful as I think I should be, about what I've gotten back. And it's easy to forget. As soon as you start to do something, it's easy to forget, oh, man, I couldn't do that a few weeks ago, a few months ago.
Right.
And the frustration, I can't run. That's very frustrating to me. And then the fatigue is very frustrating. I get so tired. If I sit at the computer and work for a while, I try to write for a while, I get so tired, I can barely keep my head up. And I get very frustrated about things. But mostly, I'm grateful that I have some kind of life back. And I wasn't one of those people who was very much like that.
So you didn't keep a grateful, a gratitude journal before?
I do now, but not beforehand.
Beforehand,
no.
So you were like a lot of us.
Like most of us.
Right. Even though you had heart surgery before, it was like, you went through it and it's fine. And it's like, okay, I know how to do it.
That was no big deal.
Right. It was normal. So you have a different perspective. Well, I have to say, I really appreciate your honesty. Yes, go ahead. Of course you're going to have one more word.
No, I just saw the word insights on your piece of paper.
Okay.
And I find I think I'm more empathetic than I was.
Okay.
I think I've even said to you at the end of a phone call, I love you.
Yeah, you do. Actually, I have to say that.
I would never have said that before. When I was writing letters as a 20-year-old, a 30-year-old, a 40-year-old, 50-year-old, I couldn't even sign them, love, Eric, because I thought that was too much of a commitment. I couldn't, when they came out with the little heart stamps, I couldn't use them because it was too much of a commitment. I couldn't send anyone a letter with a love stamp on it.
But now you can?
But now I can. Now I want love stamps. Give me lots of love stamps. Okay. Because I say that to people now that I would never say that to.
Right.
Nas would come in and hug people and always say, I love you, and it was like, back off. But now I understand that. And I'm feeling more like that.
That's important. I think that's a lesson for all of us, I think, that we really need to appreciate what we have, value it, experience it, express it. That we don't know. You say a line that we should live each day as if it's our last, because one day it will be our last.
Yes, it will.
We won't know when. And that saying those things become incredibly important. And in appreciating what we have.
Right.
And valuing it and celebrating it is incredibly important.
And it's so easy not to.
Right.
It's hard to remember.
Right.
To pay attention to it.
So we all should take a lesson for that. I appreciate you coming in. I appreciate you doing the 2 shows. We're going to continue our service in a moment, so stay, and we'll have challah and wine.